This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special return guest on the show today. His name is Doug Wilson. He is a conservative, reformed, evangelical theologian and pastor at Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. And he has written a bunch of different books like Mere Christendom, Future Men, Reforming Marriage, Rules for Reformers, When the Man Comes Around, and more. And today we are talking about his newest book. It's this book right here, Keep Your Kids, How to Raise Strong Kids in an Age of Therapeutic Sentimentalism. And this guy, he's always fun to talk to, and I guess talk about as well. He's been on episodes 495 and 569 of this podcast. 495, we basically talked about Mere Christendom the entire time. In 569, we talked about one of the best books, especially for raising young men, and that's called Future Men. Now, in this particular interview, I started out by asking him if he feels like we are on the verge of an awakening, a capital A awakening of sorts. You've heard me pose this question to several different people that have been on the show here recently, because it just feels like we're in that place for a lot of different reasons. And I really liked some of his delineating points, and then we started to get into the specific book. Why this book? Why there is an issue with this move towards sentimentalism, how, stop me if you've heard this before, how focusing on gray areas and nuance is probably a bit problematic, and then specifically what parents can do if, they're not in a situation where they've got a strong church community, or if they have their kids in private school, private Christian school, or homeschool, how are they to kind of navigate some of these areas, but also the responsibility we do have as a congregation to the raising and rearing of these children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And he kind of talks about what they do at his church. But specifically, like for those families that you're closest with in kind of your small group, home group type community, what is your responsibility to making sure those kids don't grow up to be Neanderthals? And so we really, really get into that. Then there's a very important discussion that we have about the separation between empathy and sympathy, and how people just use those as synonymous words in our modern vernacular, but how there is definitely a delineating point between the two. And then we ended by talking about emotionalism. And guys, I got to less than half of the questions I wanted to, but we were on short time today. So every time we get a chance to have Doug on the show, I absolutely love taking advantage of it. So I'm not going to keep him from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Doug Wilson, this is your third appearance on the show. We're working through that punch card, but I just got to tell you, the first two appearances, I really tried to shake things up. I really tried to get some negative emails and negative feedback, and I just didn't get very much. And so what do we have to do to make sure that we can make the right people angry this time?
Let me see what I can do to help.
Okay, well, let's start off with something simple. This probably won't tee you too much up towards that end, but there's something that seems to be happening, and you seem to have your thumb on the pulse of these things a lot of times. But obviously, we've got the changeover from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. We've got Wes Huff, a legitimate Christian apologist going on the Joe Rogan Experience. We have, public intellectuals like Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Russell Brand coming out as Christians. And again, they're kind of baby Christians. So not everything they say is something that we should, take as super informative. But you've got, people even saying that they're culturally Christian now. There's exploding sales in Bibles. Young men are coming back to the church in certain ways. Young men are flocking to Orthodox, and there's a lot of different things happening. And there was the Asbury quote unquote revival that happened a couple of years ago. It felt like just an artificially long worship service to me. It just seemed like it just kept going, but who knows? I don't want to judge. But as opposed to revival, the word awakening it's kind of running through my mind quite a bit. And I don't know if we're at the beginning of it, if we're in the middle of it, or if this is just kind of all, just hitting our brains because of here we are doing the social media thing. But what are your thoughts on that?
One of the things I'd want to do, looking at history, is I'd want to distinguish renewal movements from reformations. Okay. Renewal. So what you had, for example, in the ancient church and through the medieval period, there would periodically be renewal movements. Many of the monastic orders were founded that way. Because what would happen is someone would start a monastic order dedicating themselves to love and good works and poverty and a life of dedication and prayer and everything. And it started out as let's get serious about this, guys. And the people who founded such things were frequently charismatic, and a lot of people flocked to it. But then one of the first things that happened to these monastic orders is they got rich because of the theology of the day. people would die and leave their holdings to the monastery, and the monastery would grow rich and then would grow moribund, and there'd be a need for another renewal movement. So you had preaching orders like the Dominicans and the Franciscans with the life of simplicity, and the Benedictine order. All these were all renewal movements, which they had their moment in the sun, sort of like Promise Keepers, and they did their thing, but then their spiritual authority waned because a lot of the energy there was just simply it was not sinful or wrong, but it was simply an earthly energy. We've got to step it up, guys. And after a period of a miasmic or despairing or a depressed era, people are oftentimes ready for a change. Now, we're right in the middle of that kind of a change. That's what I would describe the vibe shift as being. The vibe shift is turning away from the older way of doing things that just wasn't working, and people are excited about it and energized and ready to go and so forth. And I think a lot of it is good and decent and valuable, but I think it's still earthly. It's I would put the Reformation in a different category, because they didn't just challenge the bad practices of the medieval church; they went root and branch and attacked the doctrines, the formal teachings of the church that set everything up for it going the way it did. So the Reformation was much more had much more of an impact, and I think Christians in this era, and oftentimes vibe shift renewals and reformations would happen at the same time. They're pitching, they're talking to the same malaise, and Christians ought to be inviting citizens everywhere to take the claims of Christ seriously, and to do it in a root and branch way, where you don't just bring Jesus in and put him on the God shelf. The difference between renewal and reformation would be in Reformation, it's a Copernican revolution. And I would do the same thing with personal conversion as with cultural conversions. Sometimes people, they live their egocentric lives, and they are the sun, and they've got different planets that revolve around the sun. Their job, their family, their wife, their hobbies, they've got all these different planets. And then when they become a Christian, what they do is they add a Jesus planet. And the Jesus planet circles around them and their needs, but it's still fundamentally geocentric. It's still fundamentally me. What needs to happen in an actual conversion is it has to be a Copernican revolution where Christ is the center, and everything swims into orbit around him and his kingdom and the things that he taught, and we have to submit ourselves to him. Well, the same thing goes with cultures. Cultures can be tempted to add a Jesus planet also, right? So Fox News feels free to say Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. Look, two planets. We're going to do the religion. We're going to do the religion thing. We're going to be favorable toward people of faith, and it doesn't matter what that faith is. That shows you that you're adding faith planets instead of proclaiming the lordship of Jesus Christ. If he's not the Lord of all, he's not the Lord at all. So I think over the next 2 to 10 years, I think that we have a real opportunity in the middle of this vibe shift to preach the gospel, plant churches, start Christian schools, and we need to be doing it with Christ at the center of everything. As we say here in Moscow, all of Christ for all of life.
Okay, that's great. And so let's get even more granular in that 2 to 10 year period. So obviously share the gospel, plant churches, launch Christian schools, more Christian content, legitimately Christian content, better theology, better doctrine, all those things. For the individual Christian, because this is a 95% male audience, so a lot of dads, a lot of people with kids still in the house, a lot of kind of lean forward, rough, action-oriented dudes. On the individualized level, not really kind of the structural level, what can individual men do to kind of aid in what we're seeing with this vibe shift?
I would say individual men, number one, should get their families to worship weekly. Worship God. Okay? Worship God and take your family with you to worship God. Secondly, read your Bible, and when you're done, read it again. When you're done, read it again. Just over and over and over. Be a man of the book. Give yourself to the reading of God's Word. Third would be, this would already apply to some of them, but third, I would tell men to get their kids out of the government school. Do what it takes to get them out. You wouldn't send your kid to a vacation Bible school run by the Jehovah's Witnesses. So why on earth are you sending them to a school to be catechized by secularists? So I would say you need to find a church to worship in. You need to give yourself to the reading of God's Word and sharing that with your family, reading the Word to your family, and then get your kids away from those things which would disciple them in an alien religion.
So I want to put a finer point on the school thing, because I've said before, in terms of education, it's either vetted private Christian school, just because, I say vetted because just because there's a cross in the lobby doesn't mean they're, a good Christian school or not, or homeschool. And then there are some like schools that are not in the public school system, some charter schools, some things like that I would co-sign. But there are people, Doug, that, and again, can't is a rough thing, because you can do just about anything if you set your mind to it. But both mom and dad work, both mom and dad are career oriented. Maybe neither one of them are really oriented for the homeschool type of thing. Maybe there's not a great co-op in their area. Maybe they live out in a rural area, something like that. And you have these people that it's like, okay, they can't afford the private Christian school that's vetted, right? Or they can't get their kids in, which is another thing that I've heard. Or their lifestyle is just such that they're in a healthy rhythm. The only thing that is unhealthy is just the significance of where their kids are at for 6, 7, 8 hours during that day. What would be your practical advice to those people that for one reason or another have said, okay, they're going to be in Caesar's school system. We understand the problems. We're just going to need to have some more conversations with them. What would you tell those guys in terms of how they can traverse that?
Okay, so first, just so that I am clear on this, there's a saying that difficult cases make bad law. So I can envision a mother with 3 kids, and the husband's a quadriplegic from a car accident. She's got to work 2 jobs just to keep everybody fed. And basically, she can't move. The church that she goes to is in no position to help. She has no options. That's just a sad case. So I don't want to come along and kick someone like that in the head. But if both spouses have to work, because otherwise, how could we pay for our lake cabin?
Right.
At the end of the day, you're going to have a lake cabin that none of your kids want to come to.
Yeah.
Because your daughter transitioned 3 years ago, and basically you don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. So I would say review your circumstances very carefully. I do believe that there are hard cases where you just don't have an option. I agree. There was a messy divorce 5 years ago, and a secular judge prohibited the kids going to a Christian school.
Right.
So, all right, there you are. But most of the time, you can make a way. And so I would encourage people in that situation, if there's an 8 out of 10 chance that there is a way that could be made, then you try to find that. Basically, your relationship to your kids is one of the most important earthly things that you do. The most important earthly thing you do is worshiping God on the Lord's Day. But loving your wife is number 2, and loving and keeping your kids is number 3.
Very good. Well, hey, I appreciate the practical advice on that. Let's go ahead and shift gears to your newest book, which is the reason that you're on today. It's this book right here, Keep Your Kids. It's a very, very quick read, guys. You can check it out in the show notes. Keep Your Kids, How to Raise Strong Kids in an Age of Therapeutic Sentimentalism. And all those words have meaning. I want to read a quick quote from the introduction here. The book of Hebrews says that all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. That's the ESV version of Hebrews 12:11. And that includes the discipline involved in child rearing, the spankings, the late-night counseling sessions, the mealtime battles over asparagus. Parenting has always been hard work, but these days it's particularly hard. So, Doug, why is it particularly hard? Why this book? Why now? Why you?
Yeah, the genesis of this book came when I was going through a fine book by Abigail Schreier called Bad Therapy. Very good book. And she's not a Christian. But she's pinpointing some problems in the therapy world, and it dawned on me that I've written a number of family books, Reforming Marriage and Standing on the Promises, and a number of books. But it occurred to me that I wrote them like 20 years ago. I wrote them half of a full generation ago, and when I wrote them, the world was basically right side up. So Christian parents had to deal with worldly standards and a false sense of sophistication, and that you had to deal with the cool kids back then. But everybody knew what a boy was. Everybody knew what a girl was. Everybody knew what was up and down. Things were still right side up. And the beginnings of the therapeutic problem that is now metastatized and we are now in a world governed by toxic empathy. That had not taken deep root yet. And so I realized that parents today, young marrieds, someone who's got married when they were 21 3 years ago, and they've got a couple of kids, they are bringing up their kids in a world that is utterly unlike the world that their parents brought them up in, right?
Yeah.
The principles stay the same. Read the word, love your kids, discipline. Those principles stay the same, but the temptations are different. Okay, the temptations are different. We are living in a day now where the world teaches us that each individual set of feelings, every person's feelings, are absolutely sovereign. And in the old school, in the old world, you taught your child how to navigate a world that was unforgiving. The world was the way it was, and you had to adapt or die, sink or swim. Okay? And there were parents who didn't do their job, and the kids would sink and drown. But everybody basically understood the task was to equip your child to adapt to the world as it is. But today, the root assumption is the world must adapt to your child as he is.
Right.
Okay. And it has gotten to absurd lengths, such that if a child feels like a girl, everybody has to cater to that. Okay? Not only if he's confused and he thinks he's a girl, the mandate has gone out that everybody else in the world has to pretend right along with him. And if the parents don't pretend along with him, that child can be removed depending on the jurisdiction from the home, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on what's going on. If there's a divorce, it enters into custody issues and all of that. So when Justice Jackson was being going up before the Senate, before her confirmation to the Supreme Court, what is a woman? She said, "I don't know. I'm not a biologist." Okay, that question did not get her laughed. That question and answer did not get her laughed out of Washington, D.C.
And it should have.
Which it would have 20 years ago. All right, it would have been all over. if she said, I don't know, I'm not a biologist. But she now sits in one of the highest seats in the land. And that tells you that this world of therapeutic sentimentalism, referred to in the subtitle, that's what I'm referring to. Sentimentalism caters to the child's feelings. The child's feelings are sovereign, and your child will be told that in television commercials, in songs that they hear on their Spotify playlist, their friends that don't have parents watching over them as diligently as you're trying to watch over your kids. They're going to get the message. I should be able to do and be what I feel like. And you have to instill in your child an instinctive bone level awareness that that's a lie.
Hey guys, real quick. A consistent question that I am asked is, Kyle, what is your diet? People want to know if I'm tracking macros or if I'm doing keto or something like that, but I track one thing. I try to get 1 gram of high quality protein for every pound of body weight. And so for me, I eat red meat every single day. Pretty much for lunch, I eat a pound of red meat every single day to get over 100 grams of high quality protein. And guys, I want you to be able to get the same thing for you and your diet. That's why I want you to use the official beef delivery partner of Undaunted.Life, and that's Primal Beef. Primal Beef is a cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. He's a retired Navy SEAL that partnered with Jocko Willink, yes, that Jocko Willink, to launch Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from the other beef delivery companies? It's a combo of the following. It's all American Black Angus cattle. The beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The beef is all natural, no hormones ever, no antibiotics ever, no mRNA ever. After slaughter, the entire carcass is dry aged and then hand cut by artisan butchers and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains tenderness, marbling, and flavor. And here's another cool thing. For every box sold, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride in knowing that your purchase will help put literal food on the table for America's finest warriors. Are you salivating yet? If not, it's probably because you're a vegan. Stave off veganism and try Primal Beef out today by going to www.primalbeef.com. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle to get $25 off of your first order. Again, that's primalbeef.com, promo code Kyle to get $25 off your first order. I mean, it goes, what is the most famous kid song of the last probably 20 years? Let it go, can't hold me back anymore. And I mean, and this is something that becomes an anthem for young kids, and it becomes a way that it's a foundational thing for them. And part of it gets into something that you talk about in chapter 1. I want to kind of get even further into the sentimentalism points. I'll read this quote here. Christian parents must turn away from the pretense of sentimentalism because it always results in savagery. It destroys the lives of children. The catch is that the people caught up in this pretense will be bewildered that they think they're savage. In fact, they'll think we're savage. You cannot split this kind of difference. There is no way to bridge this gap by negotiation, by discussion, by trying to be winsome. You can't. You can't apologize your way into a good relationship with people who are on the other side of this chasm. And it really, that's a further, I guess, explanation of something you talked about in the introduction where, you talked about the sailors at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese Zeros are flying over, and it's like, okay, I guess the time for nuance is past. And I've got like a new battle with the word nuance and with gray areas and all this stuff, and everybody wants to put things into the gray, and I'm like, some things are gray, but a lot more things are not than you think, right? So there are things that are black and white. There are things that are simply moral or immoral. They are either godly or of Satan. And so in these types of situations, how are good parents trying to do this able to, or what would you suggest to them in terms of them trying to navigate this kind of milieu of sentimentalism?
Yeah. So something that I learned from my dad that I consider invaluable is that hard teaching creates soft hearts. Soft teaching creates hard hearts.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have a church or a family, and ideally a family and a church doing the same thing, where the minister gets up in the pulpit and he says, these are the words of God. And then he preaches a message that would have been true had he never been born, right? This message would have been true had all of the people in that congregation never been born. This is God's truth. It's objective. It's unyielding. It's hard. Thus saith the Lord. So if there's a lot more of "Thus saith the Lord" in the pulpit, and a lot less of "It seems to me that," okay, that hard line teaching is a jackhammer, and our hearts are concrete that need to be jackhammered up. God takes away the heart of stone and gives us a heart of flesh. Hard teaching, the jackhammer of the word. Jeremiah says, "This is my word, not like a hammer that breaks the rock in pieces." So hard words delivered in accordance with the word of God jackhammer up our hearts. But if a minister gets up in front of a congregation and he preaches like a feather duster, right? Then all the hard hearts are just going to get harder. The concrete is just going to bake further, and then you're going to have a congregation full of pornography, abortions, betrayals, adulteries, because soft teaching gets you hard hearts. Hard teaching gets you soft hearts. Now, I want to put one proviso on. It's got to be the kind of hardness in the teaching that we find in Scripture. It's the hardness of objective truth. Like it's Ben Shapiro's "Math doesn't care about your feelings."
Yep.
It's that sort of thing. I'm not talking about fathers being harsh and bitter. I'm not talking about that kind of hardness. There's a type of counterfeit hardness that just creates more hardness and bitterness and so. So I'm not urging that, but I am talking about bringing up kids in a world where there's an objective center. God is the same. Christ is the same. Yesterday, today, and forever. That's the kind of hardness I'm talking about.
Well, and the objective center is facts. And so that's where Ben Shapiro gets the, facts don't care about your feelings, because in these types of situations, your feelings are not for nothing, right? But your feelings don't dictate terms. It's kind of what you were talking about earlier. Like there are some, very difficult situations, some hard cases. But if you base law for the totality of humanity on the individualized hard cases, that is not going to be good once you spread it out to the innumerable number of cases that you could consider. But right. Also, there's a group component to this that you start bringing into the book in chapter 2, where you discuss basically the congregation or the ecclesia, the small group, kind of your community of believers. They all have a role in the rearing of your child as well. And some of that is kind of the old school thing of like, hey, if you were 4 streets over from your house and someone saw you acting up, like they could grab you by your ear and give you a swat and send you home to your mama, and no one was going to be calling the police. But also there's this idea of, as parents, we need to be humble enough to ask for feedback on our parenting, and for those people to give us sometimes pointed but honest feedback without being needlessly harsh, but then also us being able to receive that feedback humbly and to kind of put it into our matrix of decision making as we parent. So talk a little bit more about kind of the group approach to this parenting, even though obviously mom and dad are the ones that are ultimately responsible.
Yes, I'm just going to bring this up, not to introduce another doctrinal issue, because I don't know the makeup of your audience on this doctrine, but I'm a Presbyterian pastor, and we practice infant baptism. And when we have a baptism of a child, the parents take vows to bring the child up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And then, at the conclusion of those questions, I turn to the congregation, if I'm doing the baptism, and I say, do you, as a congregation, undertake to help these parents in the Christian nurture of this child? If so, signify by saying amen. And the whole congregation says amen. So we are doing child rearing in a covenantal context that extends beyond the immediate family. Obviously, mom and dad have the primary responsibility, but you can't brush your hands off and say, that child has nothing to do with me. We're in this together, okay? Now, where does that come in? Well, let's say it's after the service sometime, and you see a bunch of boys terry-hooting around, and one of them trips and just bites it, just bam. And he gets up, dusts himself off, looks around, doesn't see either of his folks, and then runs off to find his mom. He's just normal. And then as soon as he sees her, as soon as she comes into his line of sight, he starts wailing, okay? And runs up to her wailing because he bit it. Now, you might not know that kid's name, right? But you know something about him that mom doesn't know.
Yep.
Right? He's working mom, and he's going, ow, 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 and I'm so hurt, and I need your comfort, and I need to get something from you. And so let's say you have a discussion at some point. You as a couple visit with them as a couple, and you suggest maybe you're mollycoddling your son a bit because this is something I saw. Now, one of the things I say in the book there is that if we've all taken these vows when our children are baptized, when someone comes to you with an insight or a criticism or an observation like this, that the fact that we've taken vows together doesn't mean that the criticism is right.
Right.
Okay. The person, you might be misunderstanding the situation entirely. Budget for that. But if you are the parents on the receiving end, then the one thing you must not be is defensive. Right? You can at the end of the day, you should say something like, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will discuss it. We will pray about it. We'll talk to the Lord. We'll observe our son closely. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We take it on board." Now, after 3 days of praying about it and talking about it and watching your kid carefully, you might conclude that the criticism was misguided, or you might conclude that it was on point. Either way, you have no right to be defensive when someone comes, because they took a vow, right, to help these parents in the Christian nurture of this child. And also, you alluded to this. One of the things that parents, I think, should do from time to time is ask their friends. If you've got a group of, if you're like other families, you're in a little social group where your friends usually have kids the same age as yours, and pick out a family whose management of their home you respect, and say, "Listen, if you ever see anything in our relationship to our kids, please say something. And if you have anything that you've seen that you'd like to suggest to me now, I'm all ears." Now, you might be surprised at what comes out. You think you're too strict and they think you're too soft, or they think you're too soft and you think you're too strict. You know, it could be any number of things. And again, you don't have to agree, but you do have to be open to the discussion. And part of the reason for this is that in standards are not just family rules. It's not just house rules. It's cultural standards. So your child is going to have to navigate life in a community, and you want to equip them for that, right? That means you've got to get feedback from this. And there are families. And this is another important aspect of this. I was born in 1953. I and my 3 siblings went through the government schools. There was no real private school movement to speak of then. And what there was, and we were in the South. We were in Maryland, in Annapolis, which was a segregated city. And I went to the white elementary school, and the black 2 miles away, and the white elementary school was just down the block. And then the Supreme Court decision came down, and a bunch of families participated in what was called white flight. So the private schools got energized by whites fleeing the integration of the public schools. My dad didn't want to have anything to do with that, and so there was no real option for them, and they hadn't thought it through. It was all of this stuff was new. So I went through the government school system. And as speaking for me, I was the oldest. Whenever I encountered something a contradiction between what the school was saying and what my parents taught, I always went with my parents. They had they were a wonderful Christian couple. They had a strong, we had a very tight family, very strong family, and Christ was the center, and that was just the way it was, right? Now, I was fortunate in that way because my folks sort of created that environment for me to grow up in, sort of all by themselves. They were it. There are numerous Christian families that don't have that kind of horsepower. They cannot generate, if they're the only ones, they cannot generate enough gravitational pull to keep their kids. But if you put that family in the midst of a thriving Christian community, and the kids look around, and it's not just what mom and dad say, it's what mom and dad and Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith and Mr. Murphy, all of them say this, then what that does is it gives the parents reinforcements. Okay? So there are some really tough-minded, great families that are, it's the grace of God, and they can be in a situation where they're isolated and still keep their kids. But that's not the standard. That's not the norm.
When I think it's very important for you, deputize your friends. Say, hey, if you see my kid acting up, you're more than welcome to correct them verbally. Every family can have their own discussion about, I guess corporal punishment and things like that. But I remember there was a time where, in our church, like it's a good sized church, but we have a lot of, connections. So that makes it a lot smaller. There is a guy who's got 3 kids, and it was his middle son. And I heard of a few daughters of some of the other guys in our church, and I overheard their daughters saying things that were not so nice about this guy's middle child, about him kind of being a little bit of a knucklehead and making some of the girls uncomfortable. And so I just swallowed hard and took a deep breath and went to the dad, who's a great guy, incredibly gracious, incredibly humble. And I said, hey man, I'm putting some chips in the center of the table here, but I know if I was in your position, I would want someone to tell me, here are some things that I overheard about your son that you may or may not be aware of. And I don't know what he did with that information, but he was very gracious and very thankful. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Yes, I've noticed some of these things in his personality, was not really aware that it was affecting some of the other similar aged girls in the congregation. And there was nothing like super inappropriate. It was just like, knucklehead, stupid little kid, little boy stuff, right? We've talked about that in previous conversations. We got time for a couple more questions here, but one of them, I want to get into emotionalism. We'll get into that here in just a second. But in chapter 3, you draw a stark delineation between the words empathy and sympathy, and you kind of make the argument that in modernity, that stark delineation has basically been removed. So if you would, for us, talk to us a little bit about the differences between empathy and sympathy.
Okay, great. The first thing I'll say is that for a number of people, man in the street level, there are a number of people who just use empathy and sympathy as synonyms.
Right.
As far, a man, I empathize with him, and I sympathize with him would have done just as well. It means exactly the same thing. But sympathy is an ancient word. It's in the New Testament. We have a high priest who can sympathize with us in our weakness. Okay? So sympathy is good. It's attested in Scripture. Jesus has sympathy for us. Okay? Empathy is a word of recent coinage, and it comes out of the world of psychology. And the people who are pushing it in the therapeutic world are wanting to, they have a very specific definition that is contrary to the biblical definition of sympathy. And what they want is their definition to creep out into ordinary use. And the definition is this. The pathos has to do with feeling. So sim is together and pathos feeling. So sympathy is feeling together with someone. You weep with those who weep. You rejoice with those who rejoice. That's sympathy. Okay? Empathy is sort of an all-in affair. So, and the way I illustrate it is, let's say someone is struggling with their feelings, and they're drowning in their feelings. The river is flowing by, and they're drowning in that river. What sympathy does is gets a good purchase on the bank, holds the tree with one hand, and throws them a rope with the other. Okay, so your heart goes out to them. You want to save them. You want to help them. You want them to get out of the river. And so you help them get out of the river, perhaps at great risk to yourself. Okay, that's sympathy. What empathy does is it takes a header into the river together with the person, and this is the key. When you suffer together with the person who's whatever it is, there is absolutely no judgment. Okay? Mm-hmm. Absolutely no judgment. I don't know if you've seen that very, very funny video. It's not about the nail.
No.
If you look it up, it's not about the nail. It's a discussion between a husband and a wife, and she's talking about this achy feeling that she has in her head. And as they're talking, there's a nail sticking out of her forehead, and the husband says, I think if we got that nail, and she says, it's not about the nail. Why do you keep trying to fix it?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to fix it. I just think if you get the nail out. All right. Anyway, if your viewers look that up, they will find it very edifying. But that video illustrates the difference between sympathy and empathy. Okay. He is offering sympathy. I think we could help you out by getting the nail out. There's an objective problem that I think you're not aware of, and if we got the nail out, I think we'd solve the problem. She's demanding empathy. All right, I just want you to suffer together with me in my affliction, and I want you to pass no judgment. I don't want you to offer solutions. I don't want you. So if you're dealing with someone, if you're counseling someone who is miserable and coming apart in your office as the end result of a long series of bad choices, empathy must not bring up any of those bad choices.
Okay.
It's you feel with them without any judgment whatever. Sympathy wants to offer objective help. And sympathy says, man, I feel for you. My heart goes out to you. It must be terrible. But I really think you should stop drinking yourself blind every weekend. Okay? That might have something to do with the state of your liver and the state of your marriage and the reason you just got fired from another job. So sympathy tries to help with actual problems. Empathy wants to say that the only responsibility the therapist has is to identify, and offer no solutions. And so consequently, if you're bringing up a child in a culture that's dominated by that empathetic imperative, people are going to say, don't correct your child, right?
Right.
What are you correcting? You need to empathize with a child. It's tough to be 3. It's tough to be 6. It's tough to be 15 and having gotten a girl pregnant. That's tough. You just need to no.
Well, and that's how we get in the position we're at now, where we're downstream of this moral therapeutic deism revolution to where, and again, in a lot of these therapy contexts, they don't want you to become well. And there's 2 reasons. Number 1, they don't know how to. And number 2, they would lose a client. And so they have to kind of keep the churn going, as it were. So I've got a whole bunch more questions, but we only have time for one more. So I'm going to read my favorite quote from the book and get you to talk about it here. I believe it's a quote from what chapter? Chapter 3. Many times Christians just attach Bible verses to their various sinful feelings, but the feelings are still in charge. Say a child is the most emotional one there at the praise and worship time in your Christian school's chapel services. During the extended cut worship chorus, great line, eyes are closed and the hands are in the air, everybody thinks he is worshiping Jesus, but he is actually worshiping a set of feelings that the music generates. And then when this same child goes off to be a freshman at Leviathan State University, everyone is astonished at how rapidly he loses his faith. Within 3 months, he begins to feel like he should be a girl, and you think, man, that was fast. It only took 3 months. But this was not a 3-month job. It took 15 years. Maybe he only recently started feeling like he should be a girl, but his foundational faith actually hasn't changed. he has been obeying his emotions for a long, long time. Now he's just sipping or sniping off the Bible verses. So here's the thing. Obviously, you're not saying that if a kid is very, very worshipful and emotional during worship, that he's going to eventually come out as trans. That's not what you're saying. But the point is, like, I've been reliably informed, Doug, that since I don't enjoy the sound of most contemporary Christian music, that I'm not saved. I've also been told that I am violating biblical mandates by not raising my hands and falling out in the aisle during the artificially long worship song where it's like chorus, bridge, in another key, chorus, and then we get to the third verse and then we hit the chorus another 17 times. And so for I guess, talk to our audience a little bit about the point you were trying to make with emotionalism, because you're not saying if you show emotion that that's bad, but if that's the basis of your morality or the basis of your worldview, it does become problematic.
Yeah, that's a perfect setup to this illustration. And this illustration applies to the individual child who needs to grow up understanding this. It applies to marriages. It applies to your relationship to God. And that is the relationship of your emotions to objective truth. Now, I'm not saying you should have truth and no emotions, right? Mm-hmm. I am saying that they need to be ordered in a particular way. And the way you need to think of it is, if you go down to the basement of your house, the chances are pretty good, if you can find your way to the foundation wall, you're going to find a straight line wall made up of cold, uncaring concrete. Okay?
Yep.
It's not huggable. It's not approachable. It's just there. Okay? And Jesus talks about this principle, incidentally, at the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount. The difference between the house built on sand and the house built on a foundation. Covenants are objective and cold, just like concrete. Okay? So there's a Puritan who said, first a man chooses his love, and then he loves his choice. Okay? And what he does that as the consequence of a covenant ceremony. It's the same thing with your individual emotions. So you have the marriage covenant, or you've got your covenant with God in your baptism. That's just objectively there. Okay? Now, on top of that, you build the stud walls, and let's just use marriage as the illustration of this principle, but it applies across the board. You build your house, the rooms where you live, setting them on that foundation. I want the foundation to be straight, cold, rigid, unyielding. I don't want it to be adaptable.
Right.
I don't want my foundation to be adaptable at all. But I build the stud walls on the foundation, and then we sheetrock it, and then the wife comes in, and all of a sudden you're dealing with soft sofas and cushions and curtains and throw rugs and throw pillows. The things that make the room habitable are soft, comfortable, easy. Those are your emotions. Okay? If you took all the emotions, rolled up the rug, tore down the curtains, made a pile out of throw pillows, and tried to build a stud wall on top of that, the whole thing is going to do nothing but wobble.
Yeah.
So if you have truth here, and you put your emotions here, okay, your emotions go up and down. Truth stays here. If you have your emotions as the foundation, and you put your understanding of truth on top of that, your emotions go up and down. That means everything goes up and down. Everything's in turmoil, and so consequently, one of the central tasks that parents have is teaching kids to discipline their emotions. Okay?
Right.
Not stuff their emotions, not to squelch their emotions, not pretend that they don't have emotions, but simply discipline them. Okay? So your emotions learn that they have to behave just like the rest of you does. Right? Yeah. So, and I've seen this with my kids taking care of my grandkids. Let's say a kid bites it, hurts himself, and he runs to mom. Well, let's say it was a genuine hurt, not a fake hurt, and he's crying. Mom receives him, comforts him for 15, 20 seconds, And then she says, okay, now blow it out. Okay. What happens when you get hurt in a game? You smile and keep on playing. Okay. So what you do is you come alongside the kid. That's sympathy, right? It's sympathy. And then you help them walk into a blow it out. I'm going to blow it out. And what this does over time is it teaches them to discipline their emotions, which tells them, oh, it's possible to say no to myself. If I have a surge of emotion that wants to do something or grab something or have something, or I can say no. I can talk to myself and not just listen to myself.
Great points, great delineation. I wish we had more time, but we are out of it. Again, guys, the name of the book is Keep Your Kids. Doug, that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, very good. Good interview. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. You keep writing books and we'll keep filling up that punch card, okay?
All right.
Thanks.
Deal.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the third appearance of Doug Wilson on the show. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. The only link I've got for you today is a link to where you can buy your copy of Keep Your Kids. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.